Hi there, you're listening to the Everglade Chronicles, a reading. I'm Garrett Shave, the author. Glad to have you back. Today, I'll be reading Chapter 2, Saturday Arrives. Now let's get started. The weekend had come at last, and we were all on edge. I had not visited the meadow since Wednesday, and I feared for the worst. It was Friday afternoon, and the sun was still shimmering high in the sky. We would all descend upon Everglade that evening and play the game until our mothers called for us. Fridays were nice nights, for they were long. Abby and I strolled along the birch trail. We met with Benjamin along the way. He seemed eager to see the town again. As we walked, we discussed the recent events. This time, most of Sunset Town's denizens would be there. He was as anxious as the rest of us, having heard the news of Tyler's recent elevation. "All I smell is rebellion," he said as we walked. I dipped my head and kept my eyes forward. When Venus had come to power 3 years ago, there was a massive revolution in her favor. She wasn't particularly liked at the time and new to the neighborhood. If memory served me correct, she had rallied her own troops and stormed King's Summit, literally tossing King Thomas down the hill. From then on, we pled allegiance to Caitlin, who had chosen the regnal name of Venus. "The Queen is trying to incite some sort of revolution," I said. "I figure she's trying to flush out the Gabrielle Sinclair loyalists," Ben announced. "If she can drive them off, or perhaps convert them, then Tyler's reign is secured." When we reached the small adjoining path before the bridge, we were met by some other court members. The regal Lord Ashton Smith strolled into view as if he were king. Behind him came his entourage of courtiers, mainly young children in grades 3 and 4. We stopped before him and bowed graciously, for he was above us in the caste system. "Well, if it isn't the esteemed mayor of Sunset Town," Ashton said in a huffy tone. While Lord Ashton was not a ruling noble, he was a member of the Queen's court and an aristocrat. Among the others were Lady Chloe Mountbatten, whose real surname was McDougal, Lady Alice Thompson, a nasty cousin of Schuyler, and Lord Kevin Cooper. There were a few more, but their mention is unnecessary. "Well met, my lord," Benjamin acknowledged. Lord Ashton was walking with a crude stick cane, one that complemented his idea of a Bourbon aristocrat. "I hear there is quite the commotion this year in the meadow," Ashton said, beginning his steady waltz toward the island. The guards posted moved aside without much notion, and we followed the lord, pretending we were in his entourage. "I've heard the same, my lord," Ben replied. "Do you have any information?" Ashton smiled. He had a warm smile, but he was such a brat. He had long, blonde hair that hung almost to his shoulders, and blue eyes that would make sapphires jealous. He was in grade 8, and was an island heartthrob to many of the commoners. I noticed the beginning of puberty sprouting on his face. "I might have some information, but why should I divulge any to you?" Ben frowned and stopped walking. The lord laughed and continued his waltz, followed by his large number of attendants. When we reached the outskirts of the royal city, I noticed that there were quite a number of children there that afternoon. I recognized a few, but none so much as the crowd of young ones who came rushing at us with great smiles. "Ben," they hollered, "Mayor of Sunset Town, welcome back." I smiled as they clambered around Ben, shaking his hand and hugging him. The royal city would have all of its representatives here tonight, including much of the nobility. I looked around rapidly, searching the groups for William Shepherd. "Madison," I asked a girl I knew, "have you seen His Grace?" "The Duke has not yet arrived, Miss Walker," she said politely. "We're all looking for him," a boy named Luke said sadly. "It's not like a noble ruler to be late for the season opening," Abby murmured. "I'm wondering if the Queen is about. I should go to the ministry. I'm sure security is tight at this event." "I'll see you later," I waved to my sister as she stalked off. "It is so unlike William to be absent." Ben scratched his chin. "I'm sure he'll show up," I tried to smile. From then on, we walked into the royal city. The soldiers were posted around all the main entries and exits, as well as many parts of the playground. Around us, there might have been as many as 30 children running about, gathering into their castes and into their allegiances. I noticed Sassy Cassie speaking with a few of her colleagues, as well as Lord Schuyler discussing things with soldiers. At the far side of the tall slide, I noticed Gabrielle's deputy, Mark Glass, conversing with his emissary. The idea of them being here intrigued me. What would they like to get across by being here tonight? Mark would have likely been very upset with the promotion of Tyler Crest to Duke, for it was well known that Mark had been bequeathed the position when Gabrielle left. The Queen, in her divinity, tossed aside Gabrielle's will. Mark was lanky, with shaggy brown unkempt hair and tired-looking greenish eyes. He always seemed to wear out-of-date clothing and jackets that were too big. "It would appear everyone is here," Ben said. "Even Mark Glass. Did you notice him?" "I did, and the idea of him being here is rather frightening," I replied. "I hope they do not start something, like a riot." "That would be a most unwelcome beginning to the season," Madison said sourly. A loud horn went up into the air. I turned to see Schuyler blowing into his trumpet from school. He was immensely thin, like a piece of paper. He had bright blonde hair. The sun was certainly jealous of it. His eyes were a sharp azure, lighter than Ashton's. The children quieted down, and we all stood in front of the promenade. It was a rough gravel path that led up to Queen's Summit, and was usually the main mode of transportation Queen Venus had when she traveled to the royal city and beyond. "Your attention, please," Lord Schuyler called. He had let his hair become long. I looked around, scanning the area. There were more soldiers posted than I liked to see, gathering mostly around the city. Abby was there, with Ryan, on the western front, wearing those silly hats. Duke William had still not arrived, and I was worried. "I wish to announce the presence of our beloved monarch, Queen Venus," he went on. "Her Majesty is here with us tonight, preparing for her seasonal speech. There has been a large turnout this year, and I am pleased to declare the schedule for audiences with the Queen this spring. First, I would like to ask the nobility and the elite to gather here with me by the hill." As he said, the nobles gathered. They were all in their finery, or at least what we could pretend was their finery, standing near Lord Schuyler. They wore thinly veiled smiles, masked by their elite behavior. They all knew they were better than us, and they were trying to cover that fact poorly. "Get on with it already," Cassidy yelled from the rear of the audience. "We've all got stuff to do." "Quiet down," Schuyler replied. "Do you wish to end up in prison again?" Cassidy only smirked as the trumpet went up again to usher silence. "There will be an audience with the Queen this Sunday in the afternoon. It is at this primary assemblage that all the nobility will be present, as well as the announcement of major changes that will affect the entire meadow. I suggest those with an interest be in company, or lest you find out through your friends in the city or the fields." "I am ready to descend," a call came up from the top of the hill. We all looked up and saw the Queen. Caitlin Hardy was scarcely a pretty girl. She had a pig nose and piercing coffee eyes that were as dull as old leather. While she was a bit heavier than most girls her age, she still continued to strut like a peacock in high fashion. She wore a Halloween cape of red velvet, matched with a plastic crown painted gold, with fake jewels atop her auburn mop. She held her gloved hands at center and marched down the hill flanked by two burly boys. With them they carried plastic Halloween axes and wore capes made of black sheer cloth. They stood still like statues, emotionless. "Bow before Her Majesty," Lord Schuyler called. Much like a wave in a summer's pool, we all sunk down to our knees as the Queen graced past us. A few boys obligated to a simple bow and scrape. Her throne was a wicker chair taken from her patio, a weathered thing that had endured her reign. It was usually set up at the small plateau on Queen's Summit, but her men had taken it down the hill and positioned it before the wide audience of her subjects. "I would like to thank you all for being here tonight," she said. Her voice was light and could be described as sounding broken, but lacked no malice. When she wanted to boil, she could boil. This season and this year will bring great changes upon the meadow. As many of you know, our cherished Duchess Gabrielle has departed. Her leaving has left a void in our beloved kingdom. I have mended that void, and would like to formally announce the appointment of Tyler Crest to the ducal position. There was loud booing echoing from the far corners of the Congress, which made the Queen frown. The rest of us remained silent. The Queen carried on without much haste. The guards would be moving in to silence those who kept speaking ill of Her Majesty. As was stated before, she carried on, I will host a proper assembly on Sunday at Queen's Summit. Lord Schuyler Thompson began a steady clap, and the rest of us followed. I looked around the crowd, brushing the hair out of my face. I was looking for William, for he had not yet shown up. The sky was darkening, and the Queen was waving delightfully. I wish to declare this season begun, she said with a grin. At night, the pathways were lit by lamps provided by Everglade Park. The festivities were only beginning, but many of the children were keeping to themselves. A great number had been called home for supper and would return tomorrow. The Queen was walking amongst the royal city, speaking only to nobility, the landed gentry, or the military. My sister, who was now a general, was one of the chosen victims the Queen was speaking with. She had tied pink ribbons in her hair for this occasion tonight. I stood near Ben, sipping at fruit punch that had been provided from a large cooler near the Queen's throne. "Where is His Grace?" I asked the heir. "Maybe he is ill," Ben retorted dryly. We were running out of answers. It was so unlike the gallant Duke to be late, or nay, not even arrive to the season opening. I could tell from the looks on the aristocratic faces that they were pleased to see William not in attendance. Venus and Schuyler would do anything to see Sunset's duchy ruined. "We would know if he were ill, Master Ben," Madison answered. Madison Keystone was one of the best farmers, and last year she had been elected as a foreman for them. It was another building block in the castle hierarchy that was the monarchy game. Madison had no real power, only in fact the respect and rally ability of the peasants. Her brown hair was often hung straight and never looked out of place. I never paid much attention to her eyes, but I gave the impression to recall that they were hazel in color. Ben considered her a key ally. I stared directly at Tyler Crest, who was basking in the glow of the new nobility. He was hardly a confident soldier. His hair was fiery red and his skin was ghostly pale. He wore black-rimmed glasses and seemed to be adjusting them constantly. The elite and the rich of Royal City were surrounding him. He looked so confident in that moment, having risen from the toils of the military all the way to the title of Duke in just one season. "I think we have more pressing matters," I breathed. Despite being a simple royal attendant, I should have been a spy. I knew things I wasn't supposed to, and often used spies to find out what I didn't know. Sassy Cassie, in her infinite wisdom, was head of a primitive intelligence agency. When she wasn't in prison, she was divulging secrets. "What sort of issues?" Ben inquired. "Tyler Crest," I said quickly. "He is but a simple pawn in the Queen's game. His end will be soon, and it will be swift." Madison gasped. "Mistress Walker, you are mighty bold." "She speaks the truth," Benjamin said. "Crest is an unpretentious pawn. Why else would the Queen elevate a petty guard to a duchy in a mere season? She wants to flush out Gabrielle's loyalists and re-establish the Forest Duchy in her name. Really, the power should have been handed to poor Mark, but he slipped and the Queen betrayed Gabrielle's order." "She plays an unfair game," Madison cringed, crunching her red solo cup. "She is the Queen," I said with fire in my eyes. When the night finally rolled in, the parents arrived to usher their children home. Now was the perfect time to ask Abby about the Queen, for she had been with her almost the entire night. Abby had a euphoria going on when we walked home, like she was in a dream. "I never knew being in the royal circle would be so enticing," she said as we walked. "That's hardly important right now," I said dismissively. "What was the Queen saying? Did she mention Mark Glass at all? What about Crest?" Abby blinked. "There is recruitment going on. We need more men." I made a face. "There were too many boys last year." "The Queen feels she needs to strengthen her borders, that's all," Abby replied. "She did mention Glass and how we are supposed to keep a close eye on him. His entire emissary is being watched." "Gotcha, Venus," I smirked and nodded, absorbing the information. Glass would likely stage a revolution soon enough, and Venus would be there to kill and destroy. She had to warn Cassidy, who could warn Mark of the impending doom. How was Tyler fitting in? Tyler is doing all right. His coronation is not till spring break, which is very soon. Abby turned to me and stared. "Did you see William at all? I couldn't find him. I was afraid he was missing." "I didn't see him. His younger brother Hudson was amongst the royalist crowd, though. Yes, I was speaking with him," my sister replied as we rounded the corner home. "He seems very keen about something. He feels he is on the rise in the future." Well, having a duke for a brother will get you any position you want at court, I said rudely. Last summer he hung around Lord Ashton. I wouldn't be surprised if that little brat picked up a few ungodly pointers about how to rule ineffectively. Lord Ashton does have a disappointing view of the working class, Abby observed. He is much like the Queen's circle, I said plainly. They are all elitist and disdain anyone who doesn't carry a title or has no land or holdings. Agreed, Abby said. We had reached the house and we went inside. Saturday would be the defining day. Saturdays to us were long days, and in the game they could last many in-game days. We strolled to the park before noon and found it bustling with activity. The snow was already 90% melted, and the city workers were hard at work. The bridge had extra protection, but we wiggled by quickly now that Abigail was a general. I looked up at Queen's Summit, which was busier than a beehive. My sister waved goodbye and fled into the city. I turned west, like always, and headed toward Sunset Town. Along the way I passed through a small grove of pine trees. I heard a rustle and stopped. Is someone there? I asked quietly. Sassy Cassie, the voice said, hopping out of the trees. I'm surprised you aren't spending your first day of the season in jail, I joked. Cassidy laughed. She was a skinny girl and very tall. She had one green eye and one brown eye. Many of the children found that both intriguing and frightening. Her hair was a frizzled mess. Brown waves meshed with blonde streaks that floated out well past her shoulders. I've got news, she said quickly. I've got news as well, I said. I told her about what my sister had said, and that Mark's emissary was the target. I had assumed that both Tyler and Mark would suffer from this rebellion, for Tyler was nothing but an untrained inferior soldier who couldn't rule. Sassy Cassie nodded intently. My spies are hard at work, but I have a feeling Mark doesn't want to stage a revolution. My sources tell me he is willing to negotiate with Her Majesty. This is odd, I murmured, adjusting my glasses. That's hardly the reason I hid in the bushes to talk to you, Jessica. What is the reason? I asked curiously. Sassy Cassie looked behind her. The town was no more than 50 yards away. I could see some children working at fixing their imaginary homes. Benjamin was nowhere in sight. Perhaps it is best if you see for yourself, Cassidy remarked. I strolled along the 50 yards or so to the town and waved at the children I knew. Madison approached me in a panicked rush. What's wrong? Remember last night when the Queen announced that Tyler would be the new Duke? She panted. Yes, of course, I said, blinking. Remember when you and Ben were talking about how that would likely send the island into chaos and we'd all suffer if something wasn't done? I was beginning to get annoyed. Yes, Madison. You understand it is a felony to batter a member of the Queen's gentry? Sorry, Miss Jessica, she replied. There is just some bad news. Where is Ben? I asked sharply. Madison pointed out to the fields near the water. He's down there. Let's go. We ran quickly down the steep hill and through a small patch of snow. Benjamin Morrison was standing cross-armed, wearing a yellow and black plaid shirt. He looked angry, and amongst him were multiple grade 3 students holding sticks. Opposite the town's mayor was little Hudson Shepherd, looking content. There you are, finally, the child said. I blinked. You were waiting for me, sire? Apparently this little brat is our new duke, Ben snarled. I inhaled sharply and gasped. My hand went straight to my chest. Hudson Shepherd was 9 years old with a bushy, short-cut blonde mop and blue eyes. He was a bit pudgy, but nonetheless lean. He stood with his little hands on his little hips, defying the respected mayor. Hudson was also quite short, having to look up at the people he spoke to. How can this be? I asked. Where is William? William is no longer with us, Hudson said simply. These lands belong to me now. He said I could have them. He really didn't care what happened to Sunset, actually. So it had happened. William Shepherd had committed the worst sin of our world. He outgrew us. For the many years I worked alongside William, I had loved him as a boy and as a duke. Now he had left his people and his lands to his bratty little brother, who shared the same small world views as the Queen and her circle. I could have fallen to my knees, but I held my composure. My first acts will be to renew oaths of fealty, he said gingerly. Have all the citizens line up in town to swear a new oath to me. Yes, your grace, Benjamin admitted defeat. I should like to keep you as my attendant, Jessica Walker, the lad said. I nodded at him, letting him brush past me. Everglade Meadow had just entered its season, and it was already a chaotic one. That concludes Chapter 2, our readings for this week. Join me next time when we start Chapter 3, Sunday, Tea with the Queen. Captures provides the music. Find us online on Facebook by searching The Everglade Chronicles or at Everglade Chronicles on Instagram. I appreciate your support. If you're interested in purchasing any of the Everglade Chronicles novels, you can find them exclusively on Amazon. Thank you and see you next week.